Hello everyone, welcome back to Google Developers Live. I'm Claudio and I'm one of the engineers in the Google Drive Developer Relations team. And today I'm very excited to talk about the Google Drive Realtime API. We announced this API on Tuesday, so a few days ago, and we already covered it on our previous GDL. And with Steve Basil, my colleague, talking about the what you can do with the Google Drive Realtime API. We're going to have more sessions about these exciting new features, but today what I'm going to show you is how to build your first application that uses the Drive Realtime API. I will basically follow the instructions in the quick start guide in the documentation. So this can be used in addition to the documentation if you think that anything is not clear. I hope I will make it better and clear now. So if we want to start using the Google Drive Realtime API, which let me just remind you that this will let you have collaboration features in your application, as we do in our web editors. So if you go to Google Docs and edit a document, and someone else edits the same document, you will see the changes from the other guy, and you will see yours in real time. This is what you can now add to your application using these API. So if you want to start using the Google Drive Realtime API, the documentation with the samples and the reference guide and everything you need, and this video is gonna be there as well, is at developers.google.com/drive/realtime, which is the page that I have open in front of me. So if you can look at my screen, this is the landing page for the Realtime API, and it's pretty simple. There are just a few links here. So it'd be easy to know where to go. What I'm going to do now is to try the real-time quick start. Of course, with the quick start, you will build your first app. This will be very quick. But then, to make it a proper app with a lot of features, you will have to go back to the developer's guide and maybe use the other tools we have, such as the Real-Time API Playground, and test all the other features we have. So if you click on the Real-Time Quick Start link, this will take you to another page, which is a step-by-step guide. There's actually 3 steps: configuration, writing the code, and running the sample. So not much is needed. This is probably one of the fastest quick starts we have. And at the end of this, we will have a simple web application written in JavaScript with 2 text boxes. And these 2 text boxes will be synchronized with the Realtime API. So whenever you change the content of one, you will see the same changes reflected in the second one. So if we follow this quick start guide, we'll see that first step is to activate the Drive API. This is a standard first step for any application you want to write on that uses the Drive API. To enable the use of the Drive API, you have to go to the APIs console and enable the Drive API. Let's do it together. So I have the Google APIs console here. I don't have any other projects created. So as soon as I go there, the first thing I see is a big blue button that says Create Project. So this is what I will click on. When you create a project, you have to specify what APIs you want to use. You can enable many of them. You can enable as many as you need. Each of them will have his quota. It's going to have some limits. But what we need here is just the Drive API. So I will just scroll down to Drive API and click on it to enable it. And that's it. So now my application will be able to use the Drive API. We have to do some configuration now. So we will have to go to the API Access tab to generate our credential. The Drive API uses Auth2 for authorization. So we will need to create our credentials, which is a client ID and client secret and all the other parts you might need. So we click on Create Auth2 Client ID. We have to brand our application, which is essentially giving it a name. I can call it Drive Realtime Quick Start. If you want, you can add a logo. You can add your homepage URL. This is not needed for a test application. These are optional fields. I can click on Next. And then I have to specify if I want to build a web application, a service account application, or an installed application. This is going to be a web application, client-side only web application written in JavaScript. So web application is fine. What we have to do here is to make sure that our host name is authorized. So I will click on more options here, and I will remove this template here, this sample placeholder value, example.com/callback, and I will just put http ://localhost with just one L. And the same thing for the authorized JavaScript origin. I'm going to use localhost. Of course, if you have a web server where you publish your application, you will have to make sure that the domain for your web server is listed here. Make sure also that you don't have HTTPS mismatch. So if you use HTTPS, you have to list it here as HTTPS. And if you need, you can list multiple entries, one per line. So if I wanted, I could list it here HTTPS localhost as well. But I'm not using HTTPS, so I can remove this. And that's it. That's the configuration. What I will get is a client ID and client secret and email address I can use. But what I need here is just the client ID. This is going to be a web only application, a client-side only application, so I will only need the client ID. Of course, make sure that the client secret you generate is not shared with anyone. So right now you can see mine, but at the end of this talk, I will obviously revoke this client secret. And if you need to do it, or for any reason you think your client secret is leaked, to prevent other people from using your credentials, you have to go back to the API's console and click Reset Client Secret, and you will get a new one. With that, we're done with step 1.
So Claudio, can we bump up the font just one?
Sure.
And that'll make it better for our viewers. Thank you.
So I got asked to make the font larger, and so now it's easier for you to steal my client secret. That was step 1, which is activating the Drive API and configuring my credentials. So step 2 is to write the code. What we're going to do here is you're going to write 2 files. One is an HTML file that uses the other one, which is a JavaScript file. The JavaScript file is pretty generic set of utilities you can use in this application, but you can also use in other applications. So whenever you want to write a real-time API application, I would recommend you taking a look at this file, because this will give you some helper functions, some easier ways to abstract some of the underlying complexity. So basically, most of our logic is going to be in the index.html file. Let's do this. I will copy them and run them, and then we will go through the code and explain it. So if you want to do what I'm doing, you just go to this page, take the HTML here, and copy the HTML file. I created 2 empty files here, so I can open them with my editor. And just, whoops, didn't copy. I can copy it for real, go back to the editor, paste it, and maybe make it bigger. So this is the HTML file we copied. And I can do the same thing for the JavaScript file. So I can go back here. We have tabs. So there's another file called realtime client.utils.js. Make sure that file, if you copy these files, make sure that the file name is correct, because the HTML file will reference this one. So I will do the same, and then I will talk about this code as soon as we see what it does. So there are things in this library that we're not really going to use, because this is pretty generic. But I mean, basically gives us more than we need. But this is just easier to use this library in all your applications. So let's do the same thing. I will put it in the other file, which is also empty for the moment. So I will put the JavaScript code here and save. So now I'm essentially done. So I can go back to my, web server. I can try opening this file from a web server and see what happens. So I see that this is what we get, and this is exactly what we needed. So we have these two text areas in the two files, and this will be synchronized. There is just another thing we need, and we need to do before we can run it. This says you must authorize, and this is disabled. This is because you have to tell the app which is your client ID. So we have to go back to our index.html file, and there's a variable called real-time options that says client ID, insert your client ID here. We generated our client ID in the API's console, so I have to go back to the API's console, which is here, take the client ID, copy it, and put it here in the doc in the HTML file instead of the placeholder. That's all it takes. So now this application will use my credentials. So I can go back to the page, refresh it, and now this is working correctly. So I see that this is the first time I run this app. So I have to authorize the app and grant access to the app to my credential, to my files. So if you want to try it, first thing, you have to authorize it. So you click on you must authorize. This is a standard auth to dialog. It says that this app is requesting permission to add itself to Google Drive, to view and manage files on Google Drive that this app has created, that I opened with this app, and know who you are on Google, which means know what is your username and email address, actually. So I can say allow access. The app is now authorized, and the two text boxes will be populated with some initial text. And now, let's see if I can make this bigger too. Now, whenever I type something on the first text box, I will see the same content copied on the second one. And also, it also works on the other way around, which is amazing. But so if you trust me, this is there is no tricks here. This is not some local client-side JavaScript that is just copying and synchronizing to text box. So this is going to our web server and then back. But if you don't really trust me, what you can do is that we can open a separate browser. So we have a separate browser here. I can so I open the same page on another browser, and you can see I type here. There's a small delay now. And now two of these browsers are synchronized, and the text areas are synchronized. Of course, you can have text areas. You can have strings to be synchronized, but you can also have maps or lists. So you can build whatever complicated structure you want. This is just the easiest to synchronize a single string. So let's see. So this is working perfectly. This is a very simple example. We have a number of text boxes to be synchronized. You can have as many as you want. You can have as many collaborators as you want. Of course, you can extend this to show who is editing what, as we do. So we provide you with some events that tell you when a collaborator joined and added something, and when they left, and so on. So you can build the UI you want, and it can look like ours. So let's see how this works. Let's go to the code now. Let's take it from here. So let's start from index.html. Let's make it still a bit bigger. So in this HTML page, the first thing we do is, of course, loading the libraries. So we have two libraries. One is the real-time library that comes from google.com, and the other one is the JavaScript file we created, so our helper utility function library. And then what we say is that when the page loads, we call this function called start real time. and everything else is just the HTML of the page. So we have a button that is initially disabled that says you must authorize. We have the text areas, but the important part is to see what Start Realtime does. And Start Realtime is at the bottom of this file. This will create a real-time loader, which is our helper class, with some options. And the options, and then start it. The options are here, where we define the client ID, what the ID of the button that starts the authorization is, and what function to call when the module is first created, and if we want to auto-create a file when the application starts for the first time, what is the title of this file that we create, and what is the function to call when a file is loaded. Let me just spend a minute here. So there are two functions, and there are two events that are important here. One is initialize modal, and the other one is onFileLoaded. Whenever you design a real-time API app, there's going to be multiple events that get fired. Initialize modal is fired up when the real-time modal is first created. So in our application, a real-time modal is simply a string, but it can have a complex structure and so on. So let's say you have to create your complex structure and set up some initial values, things like that, and you have to do that once for the whole lifetime of the app. That has to happen in the initialize modal method. If you want something to happen every time a user opens that file and wants to start using that file, then you will call the event that will be triggered there is called onFileLoaded. So we will do different things here. And let's see what we do actually. So we have initialize modal when the app is initially created, when the modal is initially created. And as I said, my modal, which is the underlying structure for my app, is just a string. This is not a normal string. This is a collaborative string. So we have methods to create those. And what we do here is we instantiate a string with an initial value that says hello real-time world. And that's why when I started the app, you saw that initial value. And then we say that we call it string. We call it text. Not a very fancy name, but this is what we decided to call it. And the other method runs when the file is loaded from a user. And what we do here is binding the controls on the page, so the text box that you see on the HTML, with the modal. This is what we have to do. Remember, we have two different text boxes in this app. So we will have to bind both. We're actually binding them to the same modal string. But in this sample, for the sake of sample, we are binding it in two different ways, because there are multiple ways to do it. So the first one, we use the easiest way. So we get a reference to the first text area using a standard document.getElementById. And we know this element is going to be called editor1. And then we use a helper function called bindString, which makes it super easy to bind a string to a text area. So this method takes two parameters. One is the string, and the other one is the text area. That's all you have to do. So this will take care of everything for you. If you delete something from the text, it will just reflect it. If you add something, it will just reflect it. That's all of it. If you don't want to use this, or if you want to do something different, you can instantiate a custom event listener. This will let you bind objects of whatever kind you want with UI elements of whatever kind. So in this case, we're going to do exactly the same thing as the first text area, but manually. So first, we take the reference to the second editor. And then we define a function called update text area 2, whose job is just to set the value of this text area. And we call this function whenever the text inserted event is triggered, or when the text deleted event is triggered. So we're doing, it's not super efficient, but what we're doing here is that whenever some text is inserted, we replace the value in the text box with this, and whenever some text is deleted, we do the same thing. And we also do that on key up, so we set the text so that whenever you type, you will automatically see the value going from the HTML, it goes into the model. And that's basically it. And once we're done with that, so we linked the two elements with the model. We just enable the UI elements so that the user can start playing with it. And that's all our logic. What is included in the real-time client utils.js? You, of course, can take a look at that. But what this does is taking care of the authorization. Remember, if you notice, we haven't done much about authorization. We just said this is the ID of the element that will trigger the authorization. That was it. Because this library will do everything. So we list here the scopes we need. We take care of doing authorization in different modes. So the first time you will have to go to the app and grant access and see the grant access dialog. The second time you go to the app will be automatically authorized. And that all of that is taken care of by this library. We provide some helper functions to split parameters from the URI, so that if you notice, and it's probably small to read, but if you notice, when we open the app, we had in the URL we had a file ID parameter which included the ID of the file on Drive. So when I open the same page on another browser, the library will check the file ID will take the file ID from the URL and open that file from Drive. So all of this is done by the library. And just before we wrap up, Authorize is there. You should take a look at that, but it just works as it is. And all I want to show you is that this library also performs some standard Drive API calls. So there's one called create real-time file, and you might notice that this is just standard files.insert call. So this is to create a real-time file. You create a file on Drive with a specific MIME type, and that's it. And if you want to get the metadata for this file, it is just a standard Drive API call. So you do drive.files.get with the file ID. So everything you know about the Drive API still applies here. Real-time files are standard files, standard Drive API files with a specific MIME type. And that's the only difference. So you can do all the usual operations on those. And everything else here is just boilerplate. So this is the constructor we called, and it takes all the parameters we passed and uses them, sets them where needed. And this is where we start. So we start with the authorization, and that's it. So, you should probably take a look at this in a bit more detail, but this is out of scope for this quick start. So to summarize, I spent a lot of time explaining it, but to go through all the steps here, it should take you no more than 5 to 10 minutes. And at the end, you will have an application that behaves like this, so that you have multiple text boxes that are synchronized. And then you can just wrap up by saying goodbye here, and it still works. It's great. So if you want to write your first Drive Realtime API app, go to developers.google.com/drive/realtime, and you will find a lot of documentation there, starting from the quick start page, which is what we went through today. With that, thank you so much for joining us on Google Developers Live, and a sneak peek on our next event on Tuesday. We should have the engineer team leader for this effort join us to answer your questions. Please stay tuned. We'll give you more details on our Google Developers Live page, and we'll give you a way to ask questions directly to the lead engineer who wrote this. Thank you so much. See you next time. Thank you.